I'm Joy Morris, inviting you to listen to True Stories of the Wild West, hosted by C.R. King, a production of RK Enterprises.
We're going to talk about Luke Short. He was born in 1854, died in 1893. Luke, as it was said, was an Indian at heart. When he was young, he worked on an Indian reservation. He learned to speak Sioux, and he knew their customs well. In a famous book written by Bat Masterson, famous gunfighters of the Western frontier, he called Luke a white Indian. He called him a white Indian. Well, Luke did a good job, but it didn't pay well, and he and a partner decided to bootleg whiskey. And of course, they sold it to the Indians. Now, back in those days, it was damn near a hanging offense. And the word gets out after a while. The cavalry came and arrested Luke as he was making the new batch. His partner was in town selling off the whiskey that they had already made. So he got captured. He was taken into town. They put him on a train. They were going to ship him out to stand trial. He convinced the men he wouldn't run. After all, he's on a train. So unhandcuff him, and they did. Well, Luke saw his partner at the town as they were boarding, and he turned around, and he addressed a crowd that had gathered watching him handcuffed being brought in. And he spoke in Sioux, which his partner also knew very well. And he told his partner there's a particular bend where the train would slow down, he would escape, and please be there. Well, that's exactly what happened. He jumped off the train when it slowed down. He got onto the wagon, and off they went to Leadville, Colorado. Now, Leadville had just opened up about 2 years earlier. It was a mining town, and they found silver. And it was a large boom town in its time. It was there that he discovered gambling. I mean, he always knew about gambling, but he learned to like poker, but he really came to like, which would become his game, Faro, F-A-R-O. It's a card game that he became a dealer. Now, Luke was a very bright man, but he was not learned, did not learn to read and write, did not understand manners. But he started hanging out with the higher echelon of the town. And he mimicked them as far as dress. He learned how to read. He learned by reading, and he became a gentleman, per se. Some people would call him a dandy. He was very well dressed. And he was very good at his game of poker. He got into the guy's face and shot him right through the cheeks. The guy lived. He got his money back, Mr. Short did. And he started to develop a reputation. Don't mess with Luke Short. By the way, it's funny that his last name was Short, because he was a short man. He was roughly 5'6", if that much. And people thought he was weak because he was not a big, burly man. Boy, were they surprised. Dodge City welcomed him with open arms. And there is when he became a faro dealer. He ran the gambling side of the Long Branch Saloon, the most famous saloon probably in all of the western of the Old West. Chalk Beeson, who would become mayor, and William Harris were its owners. Luke did so well that he bought a ownership of the Dodge City Bank. He also held the position of vice president of that bank. He became half owner in a ranch called the COD, the Cattle, Brand, and Operation. Sharp was invested heavily in Kentucky stock as well. So, things seemed to be pretty good, except there was a man by the name of Webster. Okay? Now, Mr. Webster owned a saloon called the Alamo. And every year or so, they would have elections. And Abe Webster ran for mayor, and he won. He had moved his saloon closer, actually next door, practically, to the Long Branch. Luke had purchased half interest in it from Chalk. And he and Harris were partners. Well, a couple of local laws were passed. And one of the laws stated, number 70, it's an ordinance, that, well, they called it the suppression of vice and immorality. Basically, what it meant was get rid of your prostitutes. And Luke did. He complied. Number 71 of the second ordinance said, define and punish vagrancy. Now, according to this, keepers of brothels, gambling houses, and those engaged in any unlawful calling whatsoever were subject to prosecution. Every saloon there, every den there, except for one. Yep, Abe Webster's Alamo Saloon. Things spiraled when Luke figured out what was going on and was complaining about Abe having his saloon open and nobody else could have their operation. He hired back the prostitutes, saloon girls, not all of them, but enough. And the police came to stop him. He went searching for what we call a councilman today, a town agent or a town official. But then he ran into the police. He held them off at gunpoint. Actually, he ran into his saloon, barricaded it, and threatened to kill anybody that came in, and they just stayed outside waiting until he gave up, which he did. He came out, he got arrested. He was taken by gunpoint to the head to the train. And he was told to never come back, because if he did, he would die. Now, this little coup d'etat was about taking away the Long Branch. They stole his Long Branch saloon. They took over his half of the bank. They took over his half ownership of the ranch, COD. They took everything. Well, Luke is not one to stand by and let anything happen to him. He reached out and contacted a very close friend of his, Bat Masterson. Bat immediately telegraphed for Wyatt Earp to come. Meanwhile, Bat went up and sat down with the governor of Kansas and convinced him that they were going into, well, they told him they were going into Dodge, what they were going to do, what the plan was. And they convinced the governor to keep the militia, keep the cavalry, keep other law enforcement from going into that town while they were there. The governor agreed. So Wyatt shows up, plans are made. Bat and Luke were at a farm outside of Dodge City waiting. Wyatt was the first man in to the town. And then there was a few other men that would start to roll in, one or two at a time from different angles. These guys would become well known in Western folklore. Jack Vermillion, Dan Tipton, Johnny Millsap, Johnny Green, Shotgun Collins, Bill Tilleman, Charlie Bassett, Frank McLean, Neil Brown, and of course Wyatt Earp. These guys were all former lawmen and very big gunslingers. Okay. Now, on the other side was then Mayor Digger, Deger, Sheriff Hinkle, Mike Sutton, the city's attorney, and Abe Webster, plus their friendships with others. They kept trying to get the militia. They tried to get the cavalry in. The cavalry wasn't far away, but they were camped. They obeyed the lawyers. They obeyed their orders. So when these guys came in and they knew what was happening, and Wyatt got a hold of one of the deputy marshals that was a friend of his and convinced him to swear Wyatt in as a deputy. He turned around and swore in all of these other guys as town deputies. Thus, when they were done, they were called the Dodge City Commission. There's photographs of a good many of them. They never fired a shot. They took over the town. The mayor, the sheriff, everybody sat down, and they agreed to give Luke Short back everything that they took from him and allow him and the other saloons to go back to how they used to be. And they were warned if they went back on their word, all of these men would be back and there would be hell to pay. But they kept their word. But Luke was no fool. He realized that his time was getting close here. Eventually somebody will take a pot shot at him. So he sold everything, packed up, and he left. Yes, he did. He wound up in Fort Worth, Texas. Also a big town, also a lot of gambling. And he was very well welcomed. People knew who he was. And he was hired by the White Elephant Saloon right across from the stockyards. Now, everything was going hunky-dory, but there was a man in town. He was a former sheriff, town marshal. He opened up his own detective agency there, and he would go around shaking down the saloons, the brothels, the gambling dens for protection money. Well, they all paid him, except for one, Luke Short. They refused. What happened next? Well, he came back to try to shake him down. And he refused again. And he came back and he was refused again. This time he was all lathered up with alcohol. And he came back. And he wasn't about to take no for an answer. He had somebody go into the saloon. They brought Luke out. Luke was warned. He was there, that Courtright, Jim Courtright, who was himself a very dangerous man, was there to talk to him. So he stepped out front. He was being shaken down. He said no. Jim Courtright reached for his gun. It was a holster-type pistol. When he pulled it out, or started to pull it out, it got hooked in his watch chain. Luke turned around and shot him twice. He was dead before he ever hit the ground. Same thing happened to a man by the name of Charlie Storms in Tombstone. He tried to shake him down, scare him away. He grabbed Luke, pulled him out in the street, and he died before he ever hit the ground. Anyway, long story short, his life was coming to an end. He came down with a disease called edema And what it is, it's an excess of watery fluids collecting in the cavities or tissues of his body. In a sense, he slowly drowned to death. He died at the age of 40. He was a professional gambler by trade. He used his gun when necessary. And he was very well liked and respected by everybody that ever knew him, except for those 4 or 5 men. So my question to you before I leave is, would you consider him an outlaw, a gunslinger, or a man that knew how to handle himself and used whatever force he had to use at the time? Okay, everybody, I'm signing off here. Thank you for your time.
Stay tuned for next week's tale.